Congresswoman Elise Stefanik from the 21st Congressional District, including parts of our listening area. First time we have an opportunity to speak with her, and she's on the line right now. Congresswoman, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Bill. How are you today?
Wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time this morning.
Absolutely.
So I want to get right into it. We have a couple of not manufacturers, but companies. For instance, a place called Pacemaker Steel here in the Utica area. They purchase steel. They purchase aluminum. The thought is this tariff, if this moves forward, could really hurt their company. What is your take on this?
So I'm concerned about the president's announcements regarding tariffs on steel and aluminum. I represent the oldest aluminum smelter in the world, actually, Alcoa. And I'm concerned about this leading off to a trade war. I think if we want to get at China's dumping of steel, we should have a much more targeted approach without targeting, for example, steel and aluminum companies in Canada, for example, that manufacturers in my district work with in terms of their supply chain.
Now, we have heard some talk, the president saying maybe we'll leave, depending on NAFTA negotiations, maybe we'll leave Canada and Mexico out of this. Would that make it, that probably would make it better? What do you think?
That would make it better. I believe that our trading partner, particularly with Canada in my district, is critical.
Yeah.
It creates about 20% of the jobs in the northeastern part of my district in the Plattsburgh region, and it's a huge economic driver and job driver in upstate New York. So I think Congress is working with the administration to make this much more targeted than this blanket tariff that's been announced.
I want to talk about the crazy week we've had here, the crazy couple of weeks, the just horrific couple of weeks we've had after the shootings, mass shooting in Florida. We've had several threats here. We had Utica College on lockdown for an entire day. Arrests have been made. This copycat stuff that is going around the country is awful. But it does bring up the gun issue. And listen, you represent the North Country. Where are you on guns and gun legislation right now?
Well, I think we need to do everything we can to ensure our schools are safe. I have been supportive of grant federal funding to ensure that schools can invest in school resources officers. I also think we need to fix the NICS information sharing. So in the case of Florida, which was just an unbelievable tragedy, there were over 40 referrals to law enforcement that wasn't appropriately shared. We need to fix that. I support the bipartisan Fix NICS bill to do just that. I am a strong supporter of our Second Amendment rights. I believe in our constitutional liberties. But I think we can do more to secure our schools. I had a discussion yesterday with students who were visiting Washington, D.C., students from my district, and they were very thoughtful about their solutions. For example, they said when they have substitute teachers, the substitute teachers don't have keys to lock the doors if there were ever something that happened. They had a back exit that didn't have anyone paying attention to who was coming and going. Hearing those local solutions from students is going to be really important for our school principals and school superintendents. It's funny, we just spoke with our sheriff here, and there was a meeting in Albany yesterday talking about what's the first thing we can do, and it really should be make sure that our schools are secure. Any legislation we talk about is not going to have an immediate effect, but we do have to talk about legislation. Do you think out of this there will be some sort of uniformed? We hear things like thoughtful and other adjectives describing possible gun legislation. Do you think anything will get done, and where do you stand on it? I do think things will get done. Next week, we are likely to vote on a bill sponsored by John Rutherford, who's a former law enforcement officer from the Midwest, and it's going to get bipartisan support. It supports that funding and grants for securing our schools. I believe we've already passed the Fix NICS bill. Hopefully the Senate will take that up. I support passing that as standalone legislation so we can have a clean vote, and I wrote a letter to the Speaker on that. When it comes to bump stocks, which was the mechanism utilized in the Las Vegas shooting, I support the banning of the sales manufacturing of bump stocks. I believe that we will be able to deliver bipartisan solutions. Yeah, the bump stocks is real. That whole issue. What is a bit scary is with these 3D printers. Now, I don't know anything about this except for you go to an event and you see. Usually, it's a school, an elementary school, putting on display. These kids know far more about this than we do. But these bump stocks can be made using a 3D printer. It is a scary world with technology, and when technology comes along and it advances, it does come with some negatives. It's a bit scary right now.
Yeah, so when it comes to bump stocks, I'm on a bipartisan bill to ban the manufacturing, sales, and purchasing of bump stocks.
Got it.
And that's something that the administration supports dealing with from an administrative perspective. I think we need to pass legislation.
Yeah. What about mental health? I mean, take this situation in Florida. Multiple times it seemed like he crossed paths with law enforcement, and nothing seemed to be done. Is there a solution there?
Mental health is a crisis in this country.
Yeah.
We passed a very comprehensive mental health reform bill in my first term, so about a year and a half ago in Congress. And we need to do more. We need to ensure that we're identifying mental health issues earlier, that we're communicating that with law enforcement when necessary. And I think the Florida tragedy highlights the need for mental health, and particularly in rural communities, Bill.
Yeah.
We need to have more resources for mental health care. I represent the most rural part of New York State. I represent about a third of the geography, and we don't have enough resources when it comes to mental health care. We need to improve that.
Your opponent with this Me Too movement that is going on, I want to ask you, being what it's like to be a woman in Congress, a young woman, 33 years old. Last year, your Democratic challenger, I think, if I can quote, I recognize her as a child. Would that ever be said to a young male?
You know, I don't think so. I serve with young men. Many of my colleagues are in their 30s, and I think, in every campaign I've dealt with remarks like that. But what I found is people are looking for a new generation of leadership, and I've earned the support of women in my district. And what's been really humbling is there are lots of young women, both kids in K-12 school, college kids, young professionals who reach out to my office, and I have the opportunity to speak with them and hopefully serve as a role model, regardless of their political affiliation. So I've felt very welcomed in Washington, and most importantly, I've been able to deliver results for my constituents. So despite the fact that I'm young, which some people may think is a weakness, I actually think it's a strength because I'm bringing fresh energy and a fresh approach to policymaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing we want is young people, younger people to become engaged and get involved in government and public service. Then when it happens, we find a way to criticize. I don't think that's the right way to go. Just my take, but I want to.
I agree with you.
I want to ask you on Fort Drum, the importance of Fort Drum. There are some industries. I mean, we have Remington Arms right in our backyard here. DFAS. These institutions extremely important to upstate New York, but particularly for you, Fort Drum. What are your feelings, and do you have optimism? I know that you've been fighting for something big for Fort Drum over the last few weeks.
Yeah, so for your listeners, many of them are probably familiar with this, but Fort Drum is home of the 10th Mountain Division, the most deployed unit in the U.S. Army since 9/11. It's the largest single-site employer in New York State, and it's an Army installation, and we are uniquely positioned to do cold weather training. We have a state-of-the-art airfield, and it's an important economic driver in my district.
Yeah.
Most important economic driver. And in my first term, it was at risk of losing 16,000 active duty soldiers because of the across-the-board defense cuts. And when I ran for Congress, I promised to unite the New York delegation, regardless of if you're a Democrat or Republican, to ensure that we're speaking with one voice to save Fort Drum. And I was proud to lead that effort, and we were cut the least out of any Army base in the country, so that was a win. Right now, I'm advocating for Fort Drum as the potential site for an East Coast missile defense location. That's something that I've been working on for 3 years. My predecessors have also worked on that. And we're the best positioned. We have the capabilities, the workforce, and that would be a job creator for our region.
How much? When is the Pentagon, going to make their decision on this? And B, when you talk about an economic driver for the region and jobs, how much are we talking about? So let's start with when.
So the Pentagon is in the process of the Missile Defense Review. I included language in the House Defense Bill last year that as soon as that review comes out, they have 60 days to announce a preferred East Coast missile defense site. Fort Drum is one of the three finalists. There's a site in Michigan and Ohio that are the other two finalists. Yeah. So we've been very engaged with the Missile Defense Agency in this process. As soon as that announcement is made, that starts the 60-day clock for the preferred site. Of course, we still have to fight for the appropriations to make sure the site is fully funded, and that will come out of Congress. We have an opportunity with this administration. The previous administration was not as supportive of increasing our missile defense funding. The Trump administration, we're hopeful, is supportive of increasing missile defense, and particularly if you look at the threats around the world today, whether it's North Korea's increased testing of ballistic missile technologies, we need to protect the East Coast. And then in terms of jobs, you asked about jobs.
Yeah.
It would create thousands of jobs in our region long term.
I almost feel that the fact that they're in close proximity with Griffiths and with DFAS could only be a positive, I would think. And I guess I don't know logistically, but I would imagine it would be a positive. Yeah, go ahead.
All the various stakeholders to write letters in support, but we have the regional support workforce technology to support the site.
Congresswoman, we are out of time. I'm sure you are as well. I appreciate it so much. I hope we can do this again. And thank you again for taking the time this morning.